I thought I was just stopping by to help, but when her aunt whispered, "Don't tell your friend you were here this long," I realized staying might change everything between us. The sun was warm on my back as I parked outside the familiar suburban home. I had only intended to stop by for a quick visit, maybe help with a small task Aunt Mara had mentioned over the phone. A simple favor, a short hour or so, nothing more. But the house, with its neatly trimmed garden and soft scent of jasmine drifting through the open windows, already suggested this wouldn't be ordinary. I walked up the brick path and knocked. The door swung open before I could even step back, and there she was, Aunt Mara, exactly as I remembered. She was 40, graceful in a way that seemed effortless, long black hair falling over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin with subtle freckles across her nose and soft laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. She wore a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, casual yet elegant, and her posture was confident but relaxed. Even in that brief moment, she had the kind of presence that made a room feel warmer, more alive. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice calm but carrying a trace of something softer, almost playful. She stepped aside, letting me in, and I caught the faint smell of jasmine mixed with the lingering aroma of fresh coffee. The house felt lived in, cozy, small touches of personality everywhere. Framed photographs, books on the shelves, a few potted plants catching the light from the window. I set down my bag and glanced around. The task today was simple: help organize some shelves and tidy up a few items in the living room. But from the moment I stepped inside, I realized it wouldn't feel ordinary. She moved with a quiet grace, offering me tools or handing me objects, and every time our fingers brushed, it was brief, electric, and entirely unspoken. A quick touch as she passed a cushion or a small laugh when I knocked over a book. Little moments that felt like punctuation in a conversation that hadn't yet begun in words. "Can you hold this while I move it over?" she asked, her hand brushing against mine as she guided my fingers around the edge of a small box. The warmth of her touch lingered longer than necessary, and I noticed a subtle smile tug at the corner of her lips, the kind that made her eyes light up softly. We worked in a quiet rhythm. I moved items across the room. She directed me with light touches and brief comments, and each time, I felt more aware of her presence. Her movements, her laughter, even the way she paused and glanced my way when she thought I wasn't looking. There was an intimacy in these small interactions, a gentle tension that made my chest feel fuller, like the room had suddenly contracted just enough for two people to occupy it fully. By the time I set down the last item, the sunlight had shifted across the room, illuminating the faint smile she gave me as we stood a little closer than we had at the start. What had been meant as a simple visit already felt like something more. And somewhere beneath the polite conversation and casual touches, I realized I was looking forward to every next moment here. Uncertain, curious, and undeniably drawn in. We had just finished tidying the last shelf when she paused, brushing a stray lock of long black hair behind her shoulder. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, bright and warm, casting a soft glow over her lightly tanned skin and the subtle freckles across her nose. Her dark brown eyes, framed by soft laugh lines, met mine, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed quieter than it had been before. "You've been here quite a while," she said, tilting her head slightly with a small, teasing smile. "Don't tell your friend you were here this long." Her words were playful on the surface, but I caught the hint underneath. A subtle invitation, a recognition that our closeness might be noticed. It made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. There was warmth in her gaze, a mix of amusement and something softer, almost shy. I laughed, trying to keep my voice casual. "I probably shouldn't, then." She smirked lightly, crossing her arms for just a moment, fingers brushing her elbows, the faintest touch grazing my arm as she shifted. That brief connection, simple as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through me. It was accidental almost, but I felt it unmistakably. "I meant it as a warning," she continued, though the humor in her tone made it clear she wasn't serious. "Your friend would tease me endlessly if they knew how long I let you linger." Her eyes flicked down to the small coffee table, then back at me, almost shyly. The unspoken message lingered between us. a recognition that this visit wasn't just casual, and that both of us knew it. I moved closer to retrieve a book she had nudged toward the edge of the table, and our hands brushed again. This time, it wasn't accidental. Her skin was warm under my fingertips, soft, with a subtle energy that made my pulse quicken. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered slightly before releasing the book, a tiny acknowledgement of connection. There was a quiet moment as we both stood there, the sunlight highlighting her graceful posture and the curves of her figure. The room felt intimate, private, and the playful warning she had just given was less about my friend and more about her own awareness of the moment. "You really shouldn't stay too long," she added softly, her voice lower now, more serious, but her eyes betrayed a hint of hesitation, almost like she was testing the limits of propriety and curiosity. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my composure. "I think I might enjoy bending that rule just this once," I said, my voice gentle, almost teasing. Her lips curved into a small, soft smile, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders relax. The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by something tender, something unspoken. Our proximity, the gentle brushing of hands, and the sunlight bathing us in warmth created a moment suspended in time, one that neither of us wanted to end. And in that bright, quiet room, surrounded by books, soft rugs, and the faint scent of jasmine, I realized this visit was already becoming something far more than a favor. After the playful warning, we moved on to another small task, organizing a corner of the living room that had collected books, trinkets, and a few scattered decorative items. I knelt on the soft rug, carefully lifting a stack of books while she handed me the next few. The sunlight spilling through the large window made her long black hair shine, and the warm afternoon light danced across her lightly tanned skin and soft laugh lines. "Careful with that one," she said, gently brushing my hand as she steadied the stack. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth up my arm, and I noticed her dark brown eyes glinting with a quiet amusement. She had the kind of graceful presence that seemed effortless, yet every movement she made drew attention without trying. As I shifted to place a book on the shelf, our shoulders brushed. It was brief, accidental, but enough to make my heartbeat skip. She didn't flinch. In fact, she lingered slightly closer than necessary to hand me the next item. Her fingers grazed mine again, light and fleeting, but charged with something unspoken. I caught the subtle curve of her lips, the soft rise of her shoulders, and the delicate way she leaned toward me to guide the placement of a vase. The room felt intimate despite its brightness. The sunlight caught the edges of framed photos and the polished surfaces of the shelves, highlighting dust motes that floated lazily in the air. I could smell the faint jasmine from a vase on the windowsill, a fragrance that seemed to cling to her and follow her as she moved. Each small action, her shifting weight, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers brushed objects toward me, seemed deliberate, though she maintained a casual composure. We paused for a moment when a small book slipped from my hands. She bent down to help me, her long hair brushing my arm, her hand resting lightly on mine as she steadied me. The warmth of her touch lingered, and I could feel the subtle pressure of her palm against my fingers, firm yet gentle. Our eyes met briefly, a flash of something curious and unspoken passing between us. "Thanks," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest had warmed in a way I hadn't anticipated. She smiled softly, a small, knowing smile that made her dark brown eyes shine. "You're welcome," she replied. Her tone was quiet, but there was a weight behind it, a hint that she was noticing the same pull I felt, that this interaction was more than just shared work. We continued, moving books and objects in tandem, each accidental touch carrying a charge, each lingering glance stretching the silence just enough to feel meaningful. I became increasingly aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle warmth of her body as we passed each other, the quiet intimacy that grew from proximity alone. By the time the shelf was organized, the room felt transformed. Not just orderly, but charged with a gentle, lingering tension. What had begun as a simple chore had become an unspoken dance of hands, glances, and quiet awareness. The bright sunlight framed her perfectly, highlighting the graceful lines of her figure, and the subtle, mature beauty in her expression. And in that quiet, bright room, I realized that these small, fleeting touches and shared movements were slowly building something far more meaningful than a simple favor. With the last of the books finally settled on the shelves, a quiet settled over the room. The bright afternoon sunlight filled every corner, highlighting the small details. The soft folds of the curtains, the polished wood of the coffee table, and the gentle curve of Aunt Mara's long black hair as she leaned against it. She was 40 years old, a beautiful, graceful woman with lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and dark brown eyes that carried both confidence and a quiet vulnerability. Her sweater hugged her figure in a way that was understated yet elegant, and even in this domestic setting, she exuded a kind of calm presence that drew me in without effort. I stood nearby, quietly observing her, feeling the lingering warmth from our earlier touches. The accidental brushes of our hands, the soft laughter, the brief glances, they had all left traces of tension, soft and unspoken. She shifted slightly, adjusting a vase on the shelf, and I noticed the gentle way her fingers lingered on the smooth ceramic before letting go. "I don't usually talk about this," she said softly, voice low and hesitant, almost as if testing the space between us. I turned toward her, attentive, sensing that something personal was about to surface. She drew a slow breath, and the sunlight caught the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, marking years of experience and quiet strength. "Lately, it's been a little lonely," she admitted. "Even surrounded by people, sometimes it feels like no one really notices me, like I'm performing, keeping everything together, and nobody sees the real me underneath." I stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, yet drawn in by the honesty in her words. Her voice trembled just enough to reveal the vulnerability she normally kept guarded. I could see her shoulders tense, then relax slightly as she realized I was listening without judgment. "You don't have to say anything," I said gently. "I'm just here. That's enough." Her dark brown eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a flicker of relief. Slowly, she extended her hand, letting it rest near mine on the edge of the shelf. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle firmness of her fingers as they lingered in proximity to mine. It wasn't a bold gesture, but it was deliberate, an invitation to share space, trust, and a quiet intimacy. I appreciate that," she murmured. Her lips curved in a soft, almost shy smile. "It's rare, to feel like someone notices more than the surface." We stayed like that for a moment, close, connected, suspended in sunlight and warmth. The faint scent of jasmine from a nearby vase mingled with the soft aroma of coffee lingering in the air, making the room feel like a safe, personal world separate from the outside. The emotional tension was subtle but undeniable. Her vulnerability paired with my attentive presence created a quiet, delicate intimacy. Not through dramatic gestures, but through the small human touches, shared glances, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were both present for each other in a way that mattered. For the first time, I felt the slow burn of something deeper forming. Not just attraction, but trust. And in that bright, calm living room, I realized that our connection was beginning to transcend casual visits and light conversation. It was becoming something profoundly human, tender, and undeniably intimate. With the shelves now perfectly arranged and the room bathed in bright, warm sunlight, neither of us moved immediately. I found myself lingering near the sofa, my gaze drawn to Aunt Mara as she tidied a small stack of papers. She was 40, a beautiful, graceful woman with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and dark brown eyes that held a quiet, knowing warmth. The soft laugh lines around her eyes deepened slightly as she smiled, a gentle, natural gesture that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. She noticed me watching and gave a small, almost mischievous smile. "You really don't have to stay," she said, but her tone carried a hint of invitation. The sunlight highlighted the elegant curve of her figure and the subtle confidence in her posture. Yet beneath it, there was that familiar flicker of vulnerability I had glimpsed earlier. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. and we fell into a quiet rhythm, speaking in half-sentences and soft laughter as she handed me a small cushion and I adjusted it on the sofa. Our fingers brushed lightly during the exchange, and I felt an unexpected warmth surge through my arm. Her hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary, a subtle acknowledgement of proximity. I didn't pull away. Then, as if by accident, our knees touched beneath the low coffee table. A brief, gentle contact, but enough to make the air between us feel charged. She didn't flinch. In fact, she seemed content to let the closeness remain, her fingers tracing the edge of the table near mine. I could feel the faint heat of her hand through the soft fabric of my sleeve, a quiet and intimate presence that demanded neither words nor explanation. We paused for a moment, and the room felt suspended in sunlight and silence. Her dark brown eyes met mine, and in them I saw both amusement and something deeper, a hint of desire, a longing that mirrored my own. The faint scent of jasmine clung to her, subtle yet intoxicating, and I became acutely aware of the soft rhythm of her breathing, the delicate movements of her fingers as she toyed with the edge of a throw blanket. I didn't realize how nice it would be to have someone here, she admitted softly, her voice low and intimate. Someone who notices the small things. I reached slightly, brushing her fingers with mine in a gentle, lingering touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the contact remain, subtle but deliberate, a quiet permission to be close. My heart beat a little faster, not from excitement, but from the intensity of shared understanding, the slow, careful recognition of connection. For a few minutes, we simply stayed near each other, hands occasionally brushing, glances lingering, words unnecessary. The room, once just a bright living space, had transformed into a private sanctuary, warm and filled with unspoken tension, trust, and the tentative promise of something more. And in that soft, sunlit pause, I realized that staying here had already changed everything. The favor, the errand, the casual visit, it no longer mattered. What mattered was this quiet closeness, this delicate, unspoken intimacy that neither of us wanted to break. The afternoon had settled into a quiet, comfortable rhythm. The shelves were organized, the cushions arranged just right, and the warm sunlight bathed the living room in a soft, golden glow. I found myself sitting across from Aunt Mara, the 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and dark brown eyes that radiated a graceful confidence. She wore a cream sweater and fitted jeans, her curvy, elegant figure casual yet refined. "You know," she said, tilting her head and offering a small, teasing smile, "you've been here far too long. Don't tell your friend about this." Her voice was playful, yet there was a warmth behind it, a subtle invitation disguised as a warning. The words made my chest tighten in an unexpected way, and I realized I was already deeply aware of how much I enjoyed being here. I laughed softly, leaning slightly forward, careful not to invade her space but drawn toward her nonetheless. "I think this might be my favorite rule to break," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my voice carried a hint of sincerity. She smiled, her dark brown eyes lighting up, and reached for a small mug of tea on the coffee table. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed it to me, a fleeting touch that sent a warmth up my arm. The contact lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, and I noticed a soft, almost shy glimmer in her gaze. There was a subtle thrill in these small moments, the gentle tension of connection that neither of us had fully acknowledged yet. She leaned back slightly, crossing her legs, the sweater draping elegantly over her form, and studied me with a quiet, approving smile. "I like having you here," she admitted softly. Her words were casual, yet the tone, low, intimate, carried a depth that made my pulse quicken. I sipped my tea, the warmth of the cup grounding me, while I watched her fingers lightly trace the rim of her mug. "I like being here too," I said, my eyes meeting hers, holding her gaze just long enough to let the unspoken acknowledgement pass between us. There was a rhythm forming in our movements, a subtle choreography of touches and glances. At one point, she leaned forward to adjust a cushion, and our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. The sunlight caught her long black hair, illuminating the gentle waves, and the warmth of her touch lingered like a quiet promise. I could smell the faint jasmine from the nearby vase, a delicate reminder of her presence. We laughed softly at a minor mishap, a book tipping from the shelf, and I felt the tension ease into something comfortable and intimate. There was teasing, warmth, and a playful permission in her gestures and words. Every glance, every accidental brush of a hand, reinforced a quiet, mutual attraction that neither of us wanted to voice yet. In that sunlit room, the bright, open space transformed into a world just for the two of us. The teasing, the touches, the quiet conversation. All of it created a tender intimacy, a safe and delicate flirtation that hinted at deeper feelings yet to be fully explored. By the time the tea was finished, I knew one thing clearly. Staying here, breaking the rule, had become a choice I wanted to make again and again. And judging by the warmth in her eyes, she might feel the same. The afternoon had softened into early evening, the sunlight streaming through the windows at a low angle, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The living room, once full of scattered books and cushions, now felt calm and orderly. But more than that, it carried the quiet intimacy of shared time. I stood near the door, preparing to leave, and watched Aunt Mara, the 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines, and dark brown eyes, move with her usual graceful ease. She wore a fitted cream sweater and dark jeans, her curvy figure framed by the warm light, exuding confident yet subtle vulnerability. She walked me to the door, and I felt the familiar pull of our shared moments. The accidental touches, the soft laughter, the quiet glances that had lingered too long to be casual. Her hand brushed mine as she handed me my coat, and the warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch, made me pause. The gesture was fleeting, yet it left a lasting impression, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection we had built over the course of the afternoon. "I really enjoyed having you here," she said softly, her voice low and intimate. She tilted her head slightly, a playful spark in her dark brown eyes, though it was softened by a warmth and tenderness that made my chest tighten. "I'd like it if you came by again soon." I smiled, my own pulse quickening, and nodded. "I'd like that very much," I replied. My hand lingered near hers, almost brushing hers again, savoring the quiet proximity. There was no need for grand gestures. The subtle touch, the shared glance, carried all the weight of unspoken understanding. The hallway outside the living room was bright with late afternoon sunlight, casting long shadows that danced lightly across the polished wood floors. She stepped back just enough to let me through the door, but I caught her gaze lingering on me, her dark brown eyes warm, attentive, and alive with subtle emotion. The faint scent of jasmine from the living room followed us to the doorway, a gentle reminder of her presence and the intimacy we had shared. I stepped onto the porch, feeling the bright warmth of the day on my face, but it was the warmth from within, the connection, the shared moments, the playful tension and tenderness that stayed with me. I glanced back, and she gave me a small, soft smile, the kind that spoke volumes without a single word. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. The air was calm, the bright afternoon light surrounding her figure like a halo, accentuating the elegance and confidence she carried naturally, while also revealing the quiet vulnerability I had come to recognize and cherish. And in that suspended, sunlit moment, I realized something simple yet profound. This visit, this shared afternoon, had changed the way I felt. It had transformed a simple favor into an encounter layered with connection, warmth, and possibility. As I finally walked away, I felt her presence with me, the memory of her subtle touches, lingering smiles, and quiet glances etched into my mind. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning, that the bright, warm days ahead might hold many more shared moments, tender, intimate, and full of quiet, human connection. As the sunlight framed their parting, and the quiet connection lingered in the air, it was clear some moments quietly change everything. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join me for more slow burn, age gap romances. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a quiet moment that left a lasting impact? I'd love to hear your story.